Hello, I'm Carter Threlkeld, and welcome to Introduction to Worship. Let's begin today's lesson.
In our textbook, Worship Through the Ages, author Vernon Whaley writes, "Most historians agree that the awakening in Europe and America from 1727 to 1790 is easily one of the first times in history when God used hymn singing and musical expression as a means for introducing revival to his church." During this great time of revival, God allowed hymn writers to play a major role in these awakenings. Men like Isaac Watts and John and Charles Wesley wrote hymns that fundamentally shaped the Great Awakening by providing a powerful new mode of worship that perfectly matched the revival's fervent evangelistic spirit. They challenged the rigid tradition of exclusive psalm singing by introducing hymns of human composure, which means hymns focused on New Testament themes, personal religious experience, and individual redemption. Like the hymns of Luther and Calvin during the Reformation, these hymns used simple, accessible language, common meter, allowing large, diverse, and often non-literate congregations to easily participate in the services. The emphasis on personal conviction and emotional engagement in their work, such as When I Survey the Wondrous Cross by Isaac Watts, resonated deeply with the movement's focus on personal conversion and helped break down social and racial barriers. Hymn writers strategically used hymns to communicate theology and doctrine. For the first time, music was used as a tool for evangelism. Please listen to this video. The Enlightenment, or Age of Reason, and the Great Awakening fundamentally shifted music from the classical into the classical period. Music pivoted towards simplicity, emotional expression, moving away from complex Baroque structures. Enlightenment ideals promoted clarity, balance, resulting in accessible, tuneful music, while the Great Awakening's focus on fervent emotion influenced musical sensitivity. The Baroque period had laid the groundwork for the classical period to develop a solid foundation, emphasizing structure and clarity. The sonata form, with its predictable A-B-A structure, became a central organizing principle in music, replacing the more improvisatory forms of the Baroque era like the fugue. The focus on human experience and individual rights led music to appeal to a wider audience, not just the elite. Composers like Mozart and Haydn crafted music with direct and memorable melodies. These melodies were universally relatable. Later in the era, Beethoven's music began to champion individual expression, laying the groundwork for the next period known as the Romantic period. The classical period saw significant advancements in instruments, primarily through the expansion and standardization of the orchestra. The harpsichord was replaced with the piano, which became a prominent instrument, and the woodwind and brass instruments were significantly improved. This period also standardized the symphony orchestra and established the four-family section layout: strings, woodwinds, brass winds, and percussion. In the string section, the violin, viola, cello, and double bass formed the core of the orchestra. The clarinet was added to the woodwind section, adding a new tonal color. And the development of the modern flute, oboe, and bassoon was ongoing, with improvements in key systems and bore designs that allowed for greater agility, volume, and expressive control. Composers began using woodwinds for more melodic roles and wrote independent chamber works just for them. While the development of the valve system for brass instruments was more significant in the upcoming Romantic period, the Classical era laid the groundwork for their increased chromatic capability. And the trombone was added to the orchestra for more power and depth. The timpani became a standard part of the percussion section for rhythmic and dramatic effect. Composers still wrote significant sacred music for the church, including masses, oratorios, and requiems. Mozart, a practicing Roman Catholic, famously wrote his Requiem Mass, but a shift towards secularism was beginning to take place. The three main composers of the classical period were Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Joseph Haydn, born in 1732, died in 1809, was an Austrian composer who became known as the father of the symphony and also the father of the string quartet for his instrumental role in developing these forms. He did not invent the symphony, but through his prolific and innovative output of 108 symphonies, he established and perfected the classical symphony structure, particularly the four-movement form and the use of the sonata form, making it the model for subsequent composers like Mozart and Beethoven. His career spanned from a choir director in Vienna to a freelance musician, and for much of his life he was the musical director for the Esterházy family, a position that both isolated and allowed him to innovate. Haydn's later years saw him achieve international fame with highly successful trips to London, where he composed some of his most famous symphonies, and then a final return to Vienna where he wrote oratorios like The Creation. Haydn's love for nature was intertwined with his deep appreciation for the folk music and rural landscapes of his homeland. Born in a small village in Austria to a family of working people, Haydn spent his formative years surrounded by the countryside. This connection to nature remained a core aspect of his musical identity, even as he later achieved international fame. His music frequently incorporates elements of Austrian folk tunes, dance rhythms, reflecting his personal connection to the rural landscape. This folk inspiration rooted in the soil gave his music a vibrant and direct, optimistic quality. Haydn often began and ended his compositions with religious phrases like "In nomine Domini," in the name of the Lord. Haydn said that his cheerful heart was a gift from God, which led him to serve him with a joyful spirit. When asked why his church music was so cheerful, his response was, "Since God has given me a cheerful heart, He will forgive me for serving Him cheerfully." Here are some of his most famous works: the Surprise Symphony, the Haydn Trumpet Concerto, and The Heavens Are Telling from the Creation Oratorio. Please listen to each of them. Next was Wolfgang Mozart, a prolific and influential composer who wrote in many, many genres, including symphonies, operas, chamber music, and piano concertos. He was a child prodigy. Young Mozart played for Empress Maria Theresa of Austria many times at the royal palace, starting in 1762 when he was just 6 years old. The performances took place at the palace and the imperial summer residence outside of Vienna. During one of these early concerts, the young Mozart famously jumped into the Empress's lap and gave her a kiss, charming her the entire imperial family. The young Mozart and his sister traveled and performed for emperors and empresses of Europe, including the French and Austrian courts. He later performed for the King and Queen of England and other European royalty during his extensive childhood tours. His performances continued throughout his childhood, and by age 8, he was performing with his own symphonies, which he had written for the public and royalty. These early experiences showcased his prodigious talent and helped him gain significant fame, though they came at the cost of a typical childhood due to his rigorous schedule. Mozart died on December 5th, 1791, at the young age of 35. He had had a short illness of about 15 days. The exact cause of his death is unknown, but the official death certificate stated he died from a severe fever. Despite his condition, he was well enough that on his last evening alive, he spoke to his friends over. He invited his friends over to sing parts of his unfinished Requiem. Here are some excerpts of some of his most famous pieces: The Magic Flute, his Alleluia, Ave Maria, Eine kleine Nachtmusik, and Elvira Madigan. Please listen. Take time to listen to these. And finally, the third most member of the famous classical composers is Ludwig van Beethoven. Some actually put Beethoven in his own separate category. He was a German composer whose life and music bridged the classical and romantic eras. He was a huge influence on romantic style, though. His career was characterized by immense creative innovation and a lot of personal struggle. Most notably, his progressive and profound deafness. He was a fiery and complex figure. Beethoven's genius and resilience transformed Western music and cemented his status as one of history's most revered composers. And his work is typically divided into 3 periods, reflecting his evolution from a master of the classical style to a visionary who reshaped musical form and expression. His early works followed the traditions of his mentors Haydn and Mozart. Then, in his middle or heroic period, he was defined by dramatic, emotionally intense, and large-scale compositions. At this point, Beethoven announced he would take a new way with his music. This is when he wrote his most famous Symphony No. 5, which begins with the Fate knocking at the door motif, bum 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 bum, and is a monumental expression of struggle and triumph. The works of his late period are highly introspective, experimental, and intellectually complex. With his deafness nearly total, Beethoven retreated further and further into his own private world, composing some of his most technically challenging and profound music in this time. like his Ninth and Final Symphony. Beethoven's funeral on March 29, 1827, almost 200 years ago today, was a massive public event with an estimated 20,000 people lining the streets of Vienna to watch the procession. The funeral featured a musical procession with prominent musicians, a eulogy by playwright Franz Grillparzer, and an oration in Latin by the University of Vienna. He was initially buried in Waring Cemetery, but his remains were moved to Vienna's Central Cemetery in 1888, where he now rests beside Franz Schubert. Beethoven's religious life, therefore, was marked by its inner complexity and contradictions, making him a quote-unquote curious Christian, in the words of some historians. Here are some of his famous excerpts. We have Symphony No. 5, Für-de-Lis, and his Ninth Symphony. In the finale of the Ninth Symphony, the singers are performing Friedrich Schiller's composition Ode to Joy, which celebrates universal brotherhood and joy. The symphony is a call to overcome hate and vengeance, to embrace peace and forgive one another. The lyrics, sung by a choir and soloists, express themes of joy, unity, peace, and a love for all humanity.
Well, that's the end of our lesson today. I hope it was a blessing to you.